This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for May 15th through the 21st. On this week's show, a man goes from a star to a megastar in one night. The world loses a promising young man, and we celebrate the birthday of a man who changed music. First, let's talk about a TV special. The Motown 25 special was recorded on March 25th, 1983 in Pasadena, California. No one knew it at the time, but one performance during that special would electrify the world. The special itself was actually pretty good. A lot of the Motown greats were there. Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, Junior Walker, Mary Wells, and Martha Reeves were there. The night had a lot of reunions. Diana Ross performed with the Supremes, Smokey Robinson performed with the Miracles, and a boy group got back together again, at least for a little while. This particular boy group performed a medley of their greatest hits, and then they all left the stage except for the lead singer. The lead singer then performed a hit off of his latest solo album, which was the only non-Motown song performed that night. About midway through the song, he spun around, slid backwards, and spun 3 times. The crowd went wild, for they had just seen Michael Jackson perform the Moonwalk for the very first time to the song Billie Jean. Now, the Moonwalk was not a new dance. People had been doing versions of it for years. In fact, if you watch old videos of 80s b-boy breakdancers, they did what was known back then as sidestepping. Michael actually learned how to do it from 2 dancers who had done it on the TV show Soul Train. Michael just took it to a whole other level and did his version of it. At the time this special was recorded, his album Thriller had been out for almost 5 months and was doing okay, but not spectacularly on the pop charts. The first single, The Girl Is Mine, with Paul McCartney, had performed pretty well. Billie Jean was the second single and was finally getting some airplay on MTV, thanks to an ultimatum by the record label head. But it wasn't a huge smash, not quite yet. Also, there was no internet to speak of at the time and no social media, so word had not gotten out about Michael's performance during the special. That all changed on May 16th, 1983, which was a Sunday night, I remember it well, when the Motown special premiered on NBC television. Before that night, Michael was a popular artist with a bunch of hits with his brothers, the Jackson 5, and a few solo hits. After that night, Michael Mania was born. All anybody could talk about was Michael's performance and especially the Moonwalk. Billie Jean quickly shot up the charts to number 1. His follow-up, Beat It, boosted by an extremely popular music video, became another number 1 smash. The album Thriller started selling like crazy. Some weeks it sold actually over 1 million copies a week. In 1984, Michael won 8 Grammy Awards for the album, at that time a record number. Today, Thriller is the biggest selling album of all time worldwide with sales of 65 million records, a record that will probably never be broken. And it all started the night of May 16th, 1983, when the Motown 25 television special was first shown on NBC television. Next, there are certain times when politics and music collide. Most times it's when something bad happens. For instance, when a mass shooting, a suicide, or violent crime occurs, politicians will usually blame alternative heavy metal or hip-hop for the trouble instead of the underlying conditions. Music tends to be a politician's convenient scapegoat to virtually anything. Music plays into just about every culture war there seems to be lately. This next example, though, is a little different because this incident started something in political circles that's become its own meme of sorts. Sister Souljah is an author who back in the early 1990s became a member of the rap group Public Enemy. She did a lot of the speaking intros on their albums such as Apocalypse 91, The Enemy Strikes Black. On May 13, 1992, as the Los Angeles riots were going on, which was a result of a not guilty verdict against 4 officers who beat up Rodney King in Los Angeles, Sister Souljah gave an interview to the Washington Post. Concerning the rioters, Sister Souljah said, quote, "If black people kill black people every day, then why not have a week and kill white people?" End quote. On May 18, 1992, that comment became public and was met with widespread condemnation, and justifiably so. Conservative politicians saw it as an opportunity to condemn not just Sister Souljah, but rap music in general. Rap music still had not gained the complete mainstream following at that point that it has now. Gangster rap was a major target of conservatives everywhere, as artists like Ice-T, Body Count, and NWA, to be blunt, scared the hell out of them. So everybody right up to President George H.W. Bush used the music to demonize one sector of the population in order to appeal to their base. 1992 was also a presidential election year, so, what Sister Souljah said played right into their plans. Here's where the twist comes in. Democratic presidential candidate Bill Clinton also saw this as an opportunity. Clinton's nickname at the time was Slick Willie. You think Donald Trump has issues these days? Nah. Old Slick Willie had plenty, from questionable business dealings to alleged multiple affairs, among many other scandals that seemingly continue to this day even. Jeffrey Epstein. At this particular time in 1992, Bill Clinton was dealing with an extramarital affair scandal that threatened to derail his presidential bid, even though he was the presumptive Democratic nominee at the time. He needed something to get people's minds off of the scandal at the time, and this Sister Souljah moment was perfect. At the time, Clinton enjoyed widespread support from people who enjoyed rap music, but he needed to appeal to more moderate to conservative voters who looked at Clinton like he was a far-left hippie and at rap music as the second coming of the Antichrist. By condemning Sister Souljah's comments, he could look like he was tough on even the people who supported him, thus making him more appealing to the general public, so Clinton went after Sister Souljah. Now, I'm not sure that this alone had the desired effect of changing people's minds about him, but Bill Clinton did win the election. That really had more to do with the fact that the economy was heading towards a recession at the time. However, condemning the base of your constituency for something has given way to its own political trope, as it were. So now, when a politician does it, it's called, in political and media circles, as having a Sister Souljah moment. And now you know where the phrase comes from and how it entered the political lexicon. When the Washington Post printed Sister Souljah's deplorable comments that led to presidential candidate Bill Clinton condemning her in public, May 18th, 1992. Before we continue, we'd like to tell you about the Music History Today podcast, where we go over the events that happened on that particular day in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops every single day, including weekends, on this podcast network. Now, back to the Music History In-Depth podcast. Certain dates in music are happy and life-changing. For instance, February 9th, 1964, when the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan TV show for the first time and kicked off the British invasion. Some dates, unfortunately, are kind of sad. February 3rd, 1959, when the plane that Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, and Ritchie Valens were on crashed, immortalized as the day the music died. April 5th is a sad day for fans of 90s grunge music, as that was when Kurt Cobain of Nirvana and Lane Staley of Alice in Chains both died, exactly 8 years apart from each other. May 18th turned into one of those days, as two men passed away the exact same way, exactly 27 years apart. Both left us far too soon, and both left behind an amazing legacy of music that still lives on. First, let's talk about Ian Curtis. Ian Curtis was born in England on July 15, 1956. As a child, he was very gifted, especially as a poet. Unfortunately, he was also bored in school and constantly got into trouble. He was caught shoplifting records and also stealing prescription pills from elderly people and selling them to his friends. On June 4, 1976, Ian went to a Sex Pistols show in Manchester, England. That particular show would impact a lot of people who went. In fact, some of the people who went ended up so inspired that they formed their own groups that went on to change music, such as the Smiths and the Buzzcocks. We'll talk about that concert when we get to the June 4th episode in a couple of weeks. But what is particular to this episode is that this concert was where Ian Curtis met Bernard Sumner and Peter Hook. They all decided to form a group together, found a drummer for the group, and called it Warsaw Pact. But then they shortened that to Warsaw, until they finally got to their final name, Joy Division. Joy Division had a very brief run of 2 major label releases. Their music was moody and ushered in the post-punk era of British music. Ian's style was quiet and his dancing was a bit strange, but people could not stop looking at him on stage. What people didn't realize at the time was that Ian was suffering from seizures. In fact, he would sometimes have seizures while on stage and would have to be taken off for treatment. Ian was also suffering from depression, which got especially bad in 1980. Add to that a failing marriage, and you had a recipe for implosion. On May 17, 1980, while going through his divorce, Ian went to visit his soon-to-be ex-wife. After talking to her, he asked her to leave the house for a little while. When his ex came back in the morning of May 18, 1980, she found Ian unresponsive in the kitchen. He had what we now, I guess, call self-care complications for censorship's sake, but you can figure out what happened. Ian was 23 years old at the time. As far as the legacy goes, Joy Division remains one of the innovators of the post-punk revolution that happened in the 1980s after them. Groups like The Cure and Depeche Mode followed their style and became huge, and also both ended up in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. As far as the rest of Ian's bandmates went, they remained together, and they changed the name of the band to one that you've probably heard of, I'm sure, New Order. Chris Cornell, born Christopher John Boyle on July 20th, 1964, rose to fame as the lead singer, guitarist, and lyricist for the bands Soundgarden and Audioslave. His powerful, nuanced vocals became a signature of the grunge movement back in the 1990s. Chris's musical journey began in Seattle, of course, where the grunge scene fostered his talent. Chris co-founded Soundgarden in Seattle back in 1984. Their early sound, which was a blend of heavy metal and psychedelia, evolved into their signature grunge-style characteristics of distorted guitars, driving rhythms, and socially conscious lyrics. Cornell's vocals, ranging from aggressive growls to the soulful serenades, became the defining element of the band. Soundgarden gained critical acclaim back in the late 1980s, releasing albums like Ultra Mega OK and Louder Than Love. The band's commercial breakthrough finally came in the early 1990s, coinciding with the rise of grunge music. Their album Bad Motorfinger featured the iconic songs Outshined and Rusty Cage, which was, of course, done by Johnny Cash as a cover version about 10 years after the fact. It also solidified their place among grunge's Big Four, alongside Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Alice in Chains. Chris's songwriting often delved into the themes of alienation, addiction, and societal ills. Songs like Black Hole Sun and Spoon Man showcased his ability to craft some catchy hooks with some thought-provoking lyrics to go along with them. Soundgarden broke up originally in 1997, with the usual creative differences. And then Chris joined up with former Rage Against the Machine members when their lead singer, Zach De La Rocha, left the group. And together, Chris and the rest of the guys from Rage Against the Machine formed the group Audioslave, achieving further critical and commercial success. In 2010, Soundgarden reunited, went on tours, and released some new music. But despite his achievements, Chris battled a personal demon, depression. He openly discussed his struggles with substance abuse, a challenge that he overcame, but one that would resurface later in life. On May 18, 2017, Chris was found in his Detroit hotel room just hours after a Soundgarden concert. His death sparked a lot of debate. While his history with depression was known, his family disputed the narrative. A lawsuit alleged that prescribed medication might have played a role in his decision at that time. That theory is conceivable depending on what things he was dealing with, I suppose. All I know is that the musical world and the world at large was rocked by his sudden death. His death would unfortunately lend itself to at least one more musical death when Chris's good friend, who was distraught over Chris's death and who was also suffering from depression, lead singer Chester Bennington of Linkin Park, also passed away pretty much the exact same way on what would have been Chris's 53rd birthday, which was July 20th, 2017. Chester Bennington was 41 years old at that time. Chris Cornell is remembered as being one of the greatest rock singers of all time, a guy who could write some really emotional lyrics and an artist who defied genre limitations. But despite the personal struggles that ultimately led to his passing, Chris Cornell's legacy with Soundgarden is just, well, for lack of a better word, undeniable. His music continues to inspire generations of musicians and rock fans. His music is also a testament of a life cut unfortunately short, but forever etched in the annals of rock history. Sad day when that happened. The death of Ian Curtis of Joy Division, May 18th, 1980. The death of Chris Cornell of Soundgarden and Audioslave, exactly 37 years to the day, May 18th, 2017. The group Fleetwood Mac started in 1967 as an offshoot of the band John Mayall and the Bluesbreakers, which was the band that Eric Clapton got his start in. The Bluesbreakers at the time consisted of Mayall, guitarist Peter Green, who replaced Clapton in the band, drummer Mick Fleetwood, and bass player John McVie. Green decided to form a new band and eventually took Fleetwood and McVie with him, adding guitarist Jeremy Spencer, with bassist Bob Brunning joining in for a few gigs. The band went through a number of lineup changes. Green himself ended up leaving the band in 1970 as drugs started to take their toll. Christine McVie officially joined the band, and the band started changing their sound and straying from the blues. A few lineup changes in the mid-1970s, including the arrival and departure of singer Bob Welsh, netted them guitarist Lindsey Buckingham, who would only join the band because they agreed to let his girlfriend Stevie Nicks join. It was at that point that the now classic Fleetwood Mac lineup was solidified. Fleetwood Mac's 1975 album, Fleetwood Mac, was the first album to have the now classic lineup of Mick Fleetwood, John McVie, Christine McVie, Lindsey Buckingham, and Stevie Nicks. The album was recorded in January and February 1975 at Sound City Studios in Van Nuys, California. From the beginning, there were all sorts of problems, especially tension amongst everybody. First off, Buckingham and Nicks were romantically involved at the time they joined the band, but were on the verge of breaking up. Second, Buckingham tried teaching everybody their parts, which did not sit well with Mick Fleetwood or John McVie. Trust me, never do that, especially if you're a guitarist. Just don't do it. A lot of the songs on the album were already written by the time Buckingham and Nicks joined up. However, Buckingham would especially leave his mark on this album. He co-wrote World Turning with Christine McVie and wrote I'm So Afraid and Monday Morning. Stevie wrote the classic songs Landslide and Rhiannon along with Crystal. Christine McVie wrote another hit song off of the album, Say You Love Me. And while all 5 members of the band played their instruments on the album, there was only one additional musician, veteran session musician and guitarist Waddy Wachtel, on the song Sugar Daddy. Fleetwood Mac, the album, was released in July of 1975. The album hit number 1 on the Billboard Albums chart and stayed in the top 10 for 37 weeks. It hit top 5 in 4 other countries and became the 2nd biggest album in America in 1976 and the 10th biggest album in 1977. It had that much of a reach. It yielded the hits Over My Head, Rhiannon, and Say You Love Me. Landslide was never actually a hit, but has since grown into a classic due to another bunch of artists covering the songs, especially the Smashing Pumpkins. On May 15th, 1975, in El Paso, Texas, 2 months before the official release of the album, Fleetwood Mac started their tour in support of the album with that now classic lineup. Right after their 1975 self-titled album set the classic lineup, their 1977 album, Rumors, turned Fleetwood Mac into superstars. That is the album that Mike Myers joked about in the movie Wayne's World as being the album they gifted you once you moved to the suburbs. True story, that actually happened. The album Rumors became one of the biggest selling albums of all time with claimed sales of over 40 million copies worldwide, 19 million of those in America alone. The classic lineup continued their successful run through the 1980s into the 1990s with albums such as Tusk, Mirage, and Tango in the Night. The band saw the classic lineup break up due to successful solo projects, especially Lindsey Buckingham, who had the hits Go Insane, Trouble, and Holiday Road, which was one of the big songs from the National Lampoon's Vacation movie, and Stevie Nicks, who was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for her solo career with a ton of hits, too many to mention here. The lineup would famously get back together in 1993 for President Bill Clinton's inauguration, do a reunion album, and then break up again. Recently, Buckingham was let go, and Mike Campbell from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers and Neil Finn from Split Enz and Crowded House joined the group. Despite pleas from the public to get the classic lineup back together again, those dreams unfortunately came crashing down on November 30th, 2022, when Christine McVie passed away at the age of 79 from a stroke that was caused by cancer. Overall, the band is one of the biggest selling bands of all time, with sales of over 100 million albums. The classic Fleetwood Mac lineup starting their first concert tour together in El Paso, Texas on May 15th, 1975. The Police were one of the biggest bands to come out of the post-punk era in England. Their mixture of punk, pop, and reggae, along with their lyrics, gave them 5 multi-platinum albums and scores of hits. Gordon Sumner was a former school teacher who was in the jazz fusion band Last Exit when he met drummer Stuart Copeland up in Newcastle, England. The two hit it off, and then when Sting moved to London, the two got together and started jamming with each other. And soon, they decided to start the band The Police. The guys got Henry Padovani, who was the guitarist for the group The Corsicans, to be their guitarist. And while the guys were getting The Police going, Sting was also in a band called Strontium 90. Stuart would sit in sometimes and play drums, and it was there that the guys met guitarist Andy Summers. Impressed by his playing, they asked Andy to be The Police's second guitarist. He said yes, but he really wanted to be the only guitarist. Sting and Stewart weren't thrilled with kicking Henry out of the band, but after a couple of gigs as a quartet, Henry was let go. The group, now a trio, released their debut album Outlandish D'Amour in 1978. The album yielded the hits Roxanne, Can't Stand Losing You, and So Lonely. The first two hits were sort of banned by the BBC, which is to say that they could not be played at certain times of the day. No matter, the songs were big hits because how much street cred could a new band get than to be banned by the BBC? Their next album, 1979's Regatta de Blanc, had the hits Walking on the Moon and Message in a Bottle. While the album hit #1 in Great Britain, they were hard-pressed to find much success in America. Outlandis only got to top 25 on the Billboard Albums chart, while Regatta didn't even crack the top 40. The band finally broke through in America with the 1980 album Zenyatta Mondata. That album had the top 10 American singles, Da Do 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 Da 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 and Don't Stand So Close to Me. What helped the album at this point was MTV, which had just come onto the scene by now. The Police's music videos gave them the exposure that they needed to crack the American market. Their next album, Ghost in the Machine, furthered their ambitions with hit songs Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic and Spirits in the Material World. The Police really hit their peak with their next album, which was called Synchronicity. The lead single from that album was written by Sting, and it is one of the most misunderstood songs in rock music history. Not for its words, but for its subject matter. The song is actually about a stalker, but people everywhere think to this day that it's actually a love song. Sting says that people still come up to him and say that their babies were conceived to this song, to which it kind of makes him cringe, really. Sting wrote the song in 1982 while staying at James Bond author Ian Fleming's GoldenEye estate in Jamaica. Sting was going through a divorce at the time, but says that he was also thinking about government and media surveillance. He only realized after the fact how creepy the song sounded, even though it sounded like a love song. Sarah McLachlan had this same problem with her song Possession, which is actually about a man who stalked her before he ended up passing away. But it actually sounds like a love song when you really listen to the lyrics. The demo of the song was recorded at Utopia Studios in London, England. It was then worked on between December 1982 to February 1983 at George Martin's Air Studios on the island of Montserrat, where they were working on the Synchronicity album. Hugh Padgham did the producing duties for it. They tried it out in a bunch of different styles before settling in on the final pop version. Andy Summers came up with the guitar riff by listening to composer Bela Bartok. They took 6 weeks to perfect the snare drums and the bass with overdubs on the drums with Oberheim DMX drum machine, a Tama gong drum, and a snare drum. The piano was added to the bridge part to give the song that little extra chef's kiss, you might say. The music video also helped the song achieve its popularity. Directed by Godley and Cream, the video is a black and white video that uses a lot of shadow effects and imagery. The music video turned out to be one of the most recognizable music videos ever to be made, and it won a ton of awards. The song itself was released on May 20th, 1983, and raced up the charts, landing at #1. It was nominated for 3 Grammy Awards. Unfortunately, it ran into a buzzsaw of an album and a ton of songs by Michael Jackson and Thriller, who ran roughshod over the various award shows that upcoming award season. The song had further life when Sean Combs heavily sampled the song for his tribute song to the Notorious B.I.G., I'll Be Missing You. Sting even graciously sang the song with Sean during a Grammy ceremony. What was Sting not so gracious about? And rightfully so, I might add. The fact that Sean Combs sampled Sting's song without Sting's permission. Combs still, to this day, has to give up royalties on the song, which, last figure I saw, meant that Sting makes about $2,000 every single day, on average, just from Sean's version, let alone the Police's original version. So, for those of you trying to do the quick math in your head, that means that Sting makes about $730,000 a year in royalties from Combs' song just because Combs didn't ask to use the song first. And there's a lesson in there for you budding DJs and artists out there. Don't steal someone's song. do the professional courtesy thing and at least ask first. The song has been estimated to contribute to at least a quarter of all of Sting's song royalties and is one of the most played songs on radio. His version, not the Sean Puffy, P. Diddy, jail, prison number, whatever he is at this point. The Police broke up after their tour due to, of course, creative differences and infighting, especially during the making of the song. But they did get back together for a 151 concert reunion tour in 2007 and 2008, and they are still considered to be one of the greatest bands of the 1980s and are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The Police's iconic song, Every Breath You Take, released on May 20th, 1983. Finally, we celebrate the life of Jeffrey Ross Hyman. Who is Jeffrey Hyman? Well, he was born in Queens, New York. Like a lot of kids, Jeffrey grew up an outsider who always wanted to play in a rock and roll band. He idolized Pete Townsend of The Who, and who didn't really? Once out of school in 1972, Jeffrey joined a band called Sniper. He was in the band for a couple of years until 1974, when he left to start his own band with a few of his friends from the old Queens neighborhood. They played clubs on the Lower East Side. One club in particular would help them and a few other bands become some of the most influential in music history. The group had a string of albums and started the American punk music scene. At that point, the poster boys of punk, the Sex Pistols, hadn't broken through yet, so, together with these other bands at this particular club, they became legends. The group even played Lollapalooza in 1996, which would turn out to be their final performance because Jeffrey passed away about 5 years later. If you want to look for the club where the band made its name, its location is now a clothing store, which at least did the club some justice by keeping a lot of the decorations intact. The club's name rights were bought and reopened in, of all places, Las Vegas. The club? CBGB's. All of the members of this band have passed on, all of them way too soon. The music scene that Jeffrey's band ruled is still out there. In fact, one of the groups, Blondie, is still going pretty strong. The other groups are still milling around in one form or another. Iggy Pop and the Stooges, the members of the Talking Heads, Bad Brains, and such. If you want to visit Jeffrey's gravesite, you can find it over in New Jersey under the name Hyman. Don't go looking for it under the name you know Jeffrey as, though. Joey Ramone, of the legendary group The Ramones, who was born on May 19th, 1951. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for May 15th through the 21st. Thank you very, very much for listening and or watching if you're watching this on YouTube or Spotify.